I am Emma. I am 34 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life looking at the world through a camera lens, catching elusive moments, freezing them in immobility so that I can return to them again and again. I could see beauty in the random light falling on someone else's face, in spontaneous gestures, in reflections and highlights, but now my world has narrowed down to one small creature lying in the next room, my son. In the past, when I returned home after filming, I was always overwhelmed by a warm feeling of comfort. The house was Alex's and my refuge, filled with countless conversations, laughter, the smell of morning coffee, and a bathrobe left on the back of a chair in a hurry. But since I returned from the hospital, holding our child in my arms, something had changed, and now the silence here seemed not cozy, but oppressive. The rooms were too empty, and the walls were alien. I remember crossing the threshold that day, feeling joy, fear, excitement, and most importantly, a great need to share this moment with my husband. I imagined him rushing to us, smiling, looking into his son's tiny face, and maybe even crying. But instead, he met us with a restrained, somewhat mechanical gaze, only glancing briefly at the baby before quickly looking away. "Darling, aren't you excited?" I tried to smile, hoping that maybe I just imagined I'd misheard something. "Say hello to your son." Alex nodded and took a step closer, but his movements were strained, as if he was forcing himself. "Yes, he's wonderful," he muttered, and then hurriedly added, "I just don't know how to handle children. Give me time." His words were careful, as if he was afraid to say the wrong thing, but there wasn't a drop of the admiration in his voice that I thought there should be at that moment. I wanted to believe that it was just stress, fatigue, that it would take a few days and everything would fall into place. But the days passed, and nothing changed. Alex left for work early and came back late, and when he was at home, he seemed to be absent, sitting with the phone or just staring at one point in silence, answering my questions in monosyllables, without the same warmth. Sometimes I caught his gaze, blank, detached, and I felt anxiety spreading in my chest. One evening, when I was rocking my son, trying in vain to calm him down, another crying fit seemed to emphasize the growing gap that had arisen between us. I couldn't stand it. "Alex, we need to talk." He raised his head, his attention was focused somewhere in the distance, beyond the walls of our house. "Emma, don't start," he gasped. "I'm tired. Work, clutter. I don't need another lecture." "A lecture?" I repeated, not recognizing my own voice. "Alex, look at us. Our family. You're a father now, and I feel like I'm doing all this alone." He finally looked at me. There was no warmth in his eyes from before, only a cold weariness. "What do you want from me, Emma?" His voice was clipped, almost irritated. "A parade? I'm here. I am working. I provide. What else do you need?" I clenched my hands, feeling my insides tighten at his words. "I want you, Alex. The man I married. The man who promised to be by my side, not the shadow that just haunts this house." He stood up, and there was tension in his movements, as if I'd cornered him. "I can't handle this right now," he said. "I'm not the enemy, Emma. Maybe you've changed." Those words hit me deeper than I would like to admit. "Do you think I've changed?" I hugged my son closer. "What about you? You disappeared every time I tried to reach out to you." Alex ran a hand over his face, then closed his eyes. I didn't know it would be like this." I looked at him, hoping for a glimmer of understanding, but his gaze was fixed on nothing again. So weeks passed, and then months. Alex was working more and more late, and I was plunging deeper into motherhood, trying to find meaning and support in it, which I so missed from my husband. Sometimes, when he came back late, I would lie in the dark, listening to him undress in the hallway, carefully closing the bedroom door so as not to wake us up. And so, one cold evening, when I was cradling my son once again, his small hands clutching the fabric of my nightgown, and my breathing was ragged from crying. I heard a sound. The front door creaked softly, announcing that Alex had returned. I expected to hear his footsteps, but they didn't follow. A second passed, then another. Silence. And then a soft, barely perceptible sound. His phone rang. I tensed up. He usually came right in to get a glimpse of our room, but now he's delayed. I cautiously approached the doorway, watching him from the darkness. He was standing in the hallway, head slightly bowed, looking at the screen, and for the first time in a long time his face expressed an emotion, but not the one I had hoped to see. He was smiling. Alex entered the house without even trying to hide his fatigue, but it wasn't the kind of fatigue that I once understood, not the kind that came after a long day at work full of meetings, negotiations, deadlines. It was a different kind of fatigue, deeper, lingering, leaving a trace of indifference on his face. He quickly looked away, as if hoping to avoid the conversation, but I needed too much to hear his voice, to see at least some kind of confirmation that there was still something real between us, and not the empty shell of the relationship in which we had been living for the last few months. "It's too late, again," I said these words calmly, but inside I felt the tension growing, as a lump of emotions that had not been released for a long time grew in my chest. "Huh," he grinned briefly, putting the keys on the table, not even trying to explain or justify himself, just inserting a familiar phrase, which, as it seemed to him, was enough to close the topic. "The work, the mess, you wouldn't understand." His voice was clipped, alien, and there was weariness in it, but not the kind that required sympathy, but the kind that repelled, put an invisible wall between us. "I don't understand." I stepped closer, hugging my son to me, as if his presence could give me strength. "Alex, I was there. I remember late nights in the studio, deadlines. I understand what fatigue is, but this is different. You're different." He snorted in annoyance, loosening his tie forcefully, as if it was suffocating him, making it difficult for him to speak. "Another one?" "How?" "Because I'm trying to provide for this family. Because I'm not jumping for joy every minute." I clenched my fingers, trying not to show the tremor that ran through my body. "It's not about providing, Alex, it's about presence. You barely look at your son, you barely talk to me, as if you're here, but you're not." I waited for an answer, but he just stared at me, and then his face hardened, as if I'd invaded territory he didn't want to discuss. "What do you want from me, Emma?" "I'm working, I'm coming home." He waved his hand vaguely around the room, as if to remind me that he was here, standing in front of me, and had not disappeared, as it seemed to me. "And all I hear are complaints." His words pierced me like a knife. "Complaints? Do you think these are just complaints, Alex? I worry about us, about you. I see how you avoid us, how you pull away, and this." I paused briefly, knowing that he would sense where I was going. "It reminds me." The air between us seemed to thicken, and tension appeared on Alex's face. He clenched his jaw sharply. "Because you're bringing it up again?" His voice was hard, almost menacing. "I thought we were past that, Emma. I thought we agreed to put this behind us." I hugged my son tighter, feeling his warm, fragile body, contrasting so strongly with the cold that stood between me and my husband. "Leave it behind?" I whispered, unable to hide the tremor in my voice. "How can I, Alex, when you're acting the way you did back then? The late nights, the distance, the silence, it's all too familiar." He jerked his head up, sighed as if holding back an outburst of anger, and then threw up his hands, no longer tried to control his emotions. "So you think I'm cheating again? Is that what you want to say?" The words sounded harsh, like a slap in the face, and the lump in his throat became even heavier. Honesty was hard for me, but I couldn't pretend like everything was okay anymore. I do not know what to think. All I know is that something is wrong. And it's tearing us apart. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that always betrayed his stress, then exhaled heavily, tired, annoyed, disappointed. tearing us apart? Maybe it's your constant accusations? Have you ever thought about it? Maybe you're not letting us move forward. And with that, he turned around and walked away, leaving behind a void that was louder than any scream. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence that weighed on my chest, until finally I heard him slam the bedroom door. My heart was beating, thudding and heavy, as if trying to warn me of something I was afraid to admit. The next day, as I was sitting with my son, absently stroking his tiny palm, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, but then curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, not even suspecting that just a few lines could destroy the world I was desperately trying to keep. "Emma, you don't know me, but I think it's time to find out. Alex lives a double life. And I'm another woman." My heart clenched, hit my rib cage, froze for a second, and then started pounding wildly. It was a stupid joke. It should have been. But then, before I could realize what I was doing, my fingers touched the screen, and photos appeared in front of my eyes, pictures that left no room for doubt. Alex was on them. Not just with this woman, but with her children. There were 3 of them, and they all had too familiar features to be attributed to coincidence. I sat there, unable to tear myself away from the screen, feeling the ground give way under my feet, as everything that seemed real suddenly turns out to be an artfully created illusion. At that moment, the front door creaked. Alex returned earlier than usual. I looked up at him, but he didn't notice my expression, or pretended not to. "Yeah," he muttered, shrugging his shoulders as if nothing had happened. Everything was slow in the office. I stood there, clutching my fingers tightly, feeling rage boil up inside, cold and burning at the same time, mixed with humiliation, with pain, with the feeling that at that second the last stronghold of my reality was collapsing. The woman, the one whose face I had already seen in the photographs, now stood in my house, absorbed my memories, my efforts, my love, and looked at me with a slight sneer, with a kind of almost condescending confidence that she had the right to do so. Alex was standing next to me, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if he could escape, hide, and avoid meeting my eyes, which were now filled with pain, anger, and disappointment. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. "You're crazy if you think you can just walk into my house and claim it." My voice sounded flat, but inside everything was trembling like a string stretched to the limit, ready to snap at the slightest movement. The woman grinned, cocked her head to one side, and took a step forward, as if testing the boundaries of what was allowed, as if enjoying this moment in which she was in control. "We need this house more than you do, Emma." Her voice was sweet, too sweet, and that only made it more annoying. "You do understand, don't you? A large, beautiful house for a large family." The words stabbed at his very heart, making everything inside shrink. A big family. She was talking about her family. About the family my husband created with her. About the children who, as it turned out, bore his features. I wasn't going to give up. "Alex has no rights to this house, and neither do you." My breathing quickened. I clenched my fists, not letting myself lose my composure, "So you can forget about your claims." She narrowed her eyes, but the smile didn't disappear from her face. Rather, it became thinner, sharper, more dangerous. "Oh, but, honey, didn't Alex tell you?" Her voice was filled with feigned surprise, but I already saw where she was leading, felt it in my gut, understood that this woman was here for a reason, not just saying these words. "You see, some things are legally moot." I glanced at Alex, but he didn't move, didn't say a word. "Alex?" There was a threat in my voice, a demand for an explanation, but he just sighed heavily and ran his hand over his face, as if he wanted to erase the look of guilt from it. "It's complicated, Emma." His voice was muffled, full of something that I couldn't immediately decipher, but which made me tense up even more. The woman took another step forward, now standing very close, so close that I could smell her, a subtle scent of expensive perfume mixed with the poisonous tint of her presence in my life. You see, Alex wasn't completely honest with you. The question of ownership of this house is, well, ambiguous. I looked at my husband, expecting a rebuttal, but he remained silent. What's she talking about, Alex? I could feel the panic starting to break through in my voice, and I had to make an effort to pull myself together. I signed some documents, he finally said without looking me in the eye, and those words suddenly took my breath away. What documents? My voice became quieter, more dangerous. Oh, Emma, the woman intervened in the conversation again, and I wanted to scream at her, silence her, kick her out of this house, but my feet were rooted to the floor, and everything inside seemed to be twisting into a tight knot. Isn't it obvious? Alex mortgaged this house to help me and our children. I stopped breathing for a second. That's a lie. I'm afraid not. Alex looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw confirmation of what he had done. The world around me has been shaken. The air became too thick, the room narrowed, and the walls seemed to be pressing down on me, forcing me to realize the reality of what was happening. You gave away the money we were saving to pay off the mortgage. I could hear my own voice, but it sounded muffled, as if it belonged to someone else. Alex sighed heavily, lowering his head, and it was a better answer than any words. The woman grinned again, looking at me with an air of victory. So, as you can see, we need this house more. I took a step back, automatically pressing my hand to my chest, as if trying to hold back the pain, which was getting stronger, sharper, almost physical with every passing moment. The word was soft, but it contained all my rage, all the hatred, all the pain I felt. The woman grinned, but there was a shadow of doubt in her eyes. What? Out. From my house. Immediately. I looked at Alex, who also seemed to freeze, like a child caught in a lie, and something inside me finally broke. You too. He shuddered. Emma. No. I shook my head, not letting him finish. Just go away. The woman looked at him, then at me, clearly debating whether to continue, but something in my face made her step back. Okay, whatever you want, she shrugged, pretending that it didn't bother her, but I could see that she expected a different outcome. She turned around and headed for the door, but before she left, she said one last thing to me. You can't do it alone anyway. Alex hesitated longer, looked at me, at his son, at the woman who was already standing on the threshold, and it suddenly became clear to me, he was not choosing, he was just stalling for time, clinging to the last moments in which we had not yet become complete strangers. Go away, Alex, I repeated, and he finally took a step toward the door, lowering his head. When it closed behind them, I was still standing, listening to the silence, which now seemed deafening. I was left alone. The woman froze on the threshold, her self-confident smile faded, and now there was not only confusion in her eyes, but also something resembling rage, like a wild animal that has been cornered, but which has not yet decided whether to accept defeat or to launch a last desperate attack. She turned abruptly to Alex, as if hoping that he would pull her out of the situation, but he just stood with his head down, his shoulders tense, and his face pale, like a man who realized the depth of his mistake, but no longer has the strength to correct it. Alex? Her voice trailed off, and there was no longer the venomous confidence with which she had challenged me just a few minutes ago. Tell her. Tell them this is our home. But Alex was silent. He didn't move, didn't try to meet my gaze, didn't try to support her or challenge me. He just stood there, broken and defeated, and at that moment I realized that perhaps it wasn't even his silence, but her disappointment in him, that gave me the most sincere satisfaction. Alex, the woman raised her voice, her hands trembled with indignation. Tell her that we have the right to live here. He slowly raised his head, and for a brief moment our eyes met. I expected to see anger in his eyes, but I saw something completely different, fatigue, fear, some kind of deep, almost childish confusion, as if he suddenly realized that he had reached a dead end and there was no way out of it. I didn't know, he finally gasped. I thought. Did you think? Her voice trembled, a hysterical note cut through it, and I saw how she clenched her fists, as if she was barely restraining herself from hitting him. You told me we were moving here. You swore that you had settled this matter. I didn't know, he repeated, and for the first time in all this time, I saw how truly broken he was, how all this time he had been living in a world of his own illusions, hoping that by some miracle everything would resolve itself, that his double life would not come crashing down on him with destructive force. The woman turned to me, her eyes flashing, her lips trembling with rage. You're lying, she said through clenched teeth. You don't have any documents, you're just trying to intimidate us. I slowly crossed my arms over my chest and grinned. So now you want to see the documents? And when you showed up here and demanded that I get out, didn't you care about that question for some reason? Her nostrils flared, her breathing quickened, but now you could see not only anger in her eyes, fear crept into her, and it was wonderful. You can't do that. There was a hint of panic in her voice. You can't just throw us out on the street. I took a step forward, feeling confidence surge through me, filling every cell of my body. Do you know what's the funniest thing? I asked slowly, looking her straight in the eye. That's exactly what you were trying to do. Her face contorted, and I saw her lips pursed, her fingers clenched into fists, and the crazy lights of anger dancing in her eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. She began, but I interrupted her. You can leave on your own. Or I'll call the police, I said softly, but every word was as clear as a slap in the face. She swallowed convulsively, then looked back at Alex, as if hoping he would say something in support of her, but he remained silent. He just kept quiet. She exhaled angrily, then abruptly turned around and headed for the door. It's not over yet, she called over her shoulder, and in her voice I heard not a threat, but rather a helpless attempt to save face. Oh, it's over, I replied calmly, feeling a strange, incomparable sense of relief wash over me. At least for you. The woman snorted angrily, but did not stop, and then, opening the door, went outside, loudly tapping her heels on my porch. I looked at Alex. Go away, I said, and my voice was firm. He didn't move. Emma. No. Just go away. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, as if about to say something else, but then abruptly turned and followed her. The door slammed shut, and I stood there in silence. My heart was pounding fast, too fast, but my head was strangely clear. They're gone. I stayed. This house is mine. I went to the window and watched them walk down the path, as Alex said something, but the woman, not listening, abruptly pushed him away, as if she had just realized what a coward he was. And I knew they wouldn't come back. They thought they could come and destroy everything, but now everything is different. I have the situation under control now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. I paused, letting her words hang in the air, letting them hiss to the pavement, to the ears of the neighbors, to their curious stares, which were undoubtedly already staring at us, greedily absorbing this scene like another episode of a scandalous show. Did she want to make me look heartless? A domineering woman locked in a house full of wealth and luxury, while her poor children huddle in a cramped apartment? So be it. Let him talk. I watched her with icy calm, almost with curiosity, like an actress who was too caught up in her role. Do you want people to feel sorry for you? I asked, my voice flat but steely. Do you want them to see you as a victim, a poor, unhappy mother, driven out of the house? You can tell them whatever you want, but there's one little detail that ruins your whole drama. She lifted her chin, and her eyes sparkled, but now they were wary. And what is this detail? I folded my arms across my chest, tilted my head slightly, and grinned. Your children didn't live here. Never. Her lips parted, but she couldn't find anything to say. You tried to kick me out of my house, hoping that I would meekly agree, obey, tuck my tail and leave. You thought you could come here like a queen and grab whatever you wanted. But the reality, unfortunately for you, is not so accommodating. This house is not yours. Never was and never will be. It was Alex's house. Stop it, she screamed, her voice trembling with anger, but there was no longer the same confidence in it as before. So he's mine. I laughed. Loudly, sincerely, so that her cheeks flushed with humiliation. Do you really think so? I shook my head. You don't even know who Alex is. You created an image that was comfortable, beautiful, and appropriate to your desires, and you lived in it, reveling in your fantasies. But the truth is, he's just an ordinary office clerk. You're lying. Stop it, she screamed, her hands clenched into fists, and the children behind her seemed to pull their heads into their shoulders, stepping back, trying to disappear into thin air. Alex, tell her. She turned to him, her eyes burning with desperation, demand, command. Alex was silent. He stood hunched over, with his shoulders hunched, not daring to raise his head. He knew that the charm was gone, that the line no longer held, that all his games were over. Alex. There was a plea in her voice now. Tell her it's not true. He raised his head, looked at her, then looked at me, and I saw in his eyes the same emptiness that appears in a person who realizes that he has lost. He gasped, and that was enough. She understood. The realization pierced her like an icy blade. She screamed like a wounded animal, her face contorted, her eyes darted from side to side, and at that moment she looked lost, crushed, and lost all her cards. But she couldn't give up. I couldn't just turn around and leave. You're going to regret this, she hissed, her voice trembling, but there were still threats in it. Maybe, I shrugged. But not today. I took a step forward and motioned for her to leave. Out. She stood for a moment longer, her chest heaving, her hands shaking, but then she whirled around, grabbed the children by the arms and dragged them away with her. The neighbors slowly dispersed, casting sidelong glances at me, some whispering, some shaking their heads, but I didn't care. Alex was still standing there. You too, I said, and my voice was cold. He looked up at me, and there was so much pain, so much regret, so much pitiful pleading in his eyes that at some point I even felt sorry for him. Emma. No. I shook my head. You've made your choice. Now go away. He didn't move. Where should I go? That's not my problem anymore. I stepped back and slammed the door in his face. There was silence in the house. I took a deep breath, ran my hand over my face, and suddenly realized that I didn't want to cry. I don't want to scream, run around the room, collapse on the floor in hysterics. I just felt relieved. I went to the window and watched Alex slowly walk away down the path, as his mistress was waiting for him by the car with her arms crossed over her chest, as he lowered his head, as if resigned to his fate. And at that moment, I realized, this is really the end. But not for me. Alex flinched, but didn't look away, his lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but the air between us was too thick with unspoken accusations for words to break through. He looked so pathetic, so lost, that if I had been the woman who loved him once, I might have felt a pang of pity, but now there was nothing left in me but icy contempt, intertwined with fatigue. You don't even understand, I finally said, shaking my head. You have no idea what you've done. You broke us, Alex. He destroyed everything that we had been building for years. You didn't just leave. You lied, betrayed, replaced me, our family, our life with a cheap illusion, and now that your fairy tale has crumbled to dust, you come here expecting me to open the door for you? He winced, his face contorted as if I'd slapped him. That's not true, he muttered. I realized that I made a mistake. I was blinded. Blinded? I grinned, but there was no humor in the sound. You call that blinding? No, Alex, you knew what you were doing. You knew when you lied to my face. He knew when you left the house and went to her. You knew when you promised her a house that didn't belong to you. You've made a choice. He inhaled sharply, as if I'd pierced right through him, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to protect his feelings anymore. I want to fix this, he repeated, his voice becoming more urgent, even desperate. I know that words don't mean anything, but I'm ready to prove it. Prove it? I took a step forward, and he instinctively stepped back. And how are you going to do that, Alex? Are you going to take away the children you've been so protective of? Will you make them forget that you promised them life in this house? Or do you think I'm just going to take your word for it, let you back into my life, and pretend nothing happened? He froze, and for the first time I saw something like real pain in his eyes. I just want to be with you and our son. Those words should have touched me. They should have, but they didn't. I looked at him and tried to remember the man I once married, the one I loved, but he was gone. There was only this man in front of me, pathetic, broken, trying to grab onto what he had destroyed. It's too late, Alex. He clenched his jaw, his shoulders slumped. Emma. Go away. He didn't move, just closed his eyes and clenched his fists. You don't understand. Oh, believe me, I understand. I pressed my lips together. You're afraid. You're afraid that staying with her means admitting that you've lost. But you lost, Alex. You lost the moment you made a choice in her favor. It's not that simple. That's exactly what's simple. I opened the door wider, pointing him out. Go away. Alex stood rooted to the spot, but then I saw something change in his gaze. The sadness gave way to something else. You still don't get it, do you? He said slowly. Do you think this is the end? What did you win? I narrowed my eyes. This is not a game, Alex. There are no winners here. There are only consequences. He took a step back, and his face took on a strange expression, a mixture of anger and pain, resentment, and something else that I couldn't make out. We'll see about that. Yes, we'll see, I nodded and slammed the door. I stood in silence, listening to his footsteps recede, as eventually the car door slams and the sound of an engine leaving is heard. I should have felt relieved. But instead, anxiety enveloped me. His words stuck in my head like a splinter. We'll see about that. I didn't know what he meant. But something told me that it wasn't over yet. Alex stood in front of me, his shoulders hunched, his gaze wandering, as if he was looking for at least some loophole, some last chance to replay everything, to fix something that could no longer be fixed. He looked lost, broken, like a man who had just realized that his ship had left a long time ago, and he was left on the shore, and now he had nowhere to go. Yes, Emma, he repeated, in the voice of a man who clings to the last thing he has left. I know I don't deserve this. I know I messed up, but I want to try. I will do everything to make amends to you and our son. I looked at him, and something tightened in my chest, but it wasn't regret or sympathy, but fatigue, deep, penetrating to the bones. He was saying words that he should have said a long time ago, but now they had no power, they were just echoes of the past that could not be returned. It's too late, Alex, I said, and my voice sounded surprisingly steady. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. We're moving on. Without you. He flinched as if from a slap in the face, and I saw defeat permeate every line of his face, as his lips twitched, as his fists clenched and then unclenched, as if he was struggling with the desire to say something, to prove something, but realized that he no longer had any rights or arguments. Emma, please, he took a step forward, but I didn't move, didn't even give him a chance to approach me. Don't do that. Think about our son. He needs his father." His words hurt me, of course they did. No matter how hard I tried to show that I didn't care, he was still a part of my child's life. He was still the one who gave him life. But what did the needed mean? Was he there when his son smiled for the first time? Did I hold him in my arms during those sleepless nights when I was exhausted? Was he the kind of support I could rely on? No. He met his father, Alex, I said softly but firmly. And where have you been? With her. With them. You're not the man we need. It's time for you to understand that. I saw how he struggled with himself, how he wanted to object, but could not find the words. He stood there for a few more moments, as if hoping that I would change my mind, that I would step back, that I would at least close my fingers, clinging to the past, but no. I was too far away from the woman who once believed in us. And then, without saying another word, he turned around and left. I watched his figure disappear into the night until I was alone. The last parts of my old life have finally fallen away, leaving room for something new, something of mine. A week later, I signed the divorce papers. Alex was just a man from my past now, a shadow that no longer shadowed my door. The court ordered him to pay child support, a tiny justice in the grand scheme of things, but I didn't care. Money couldn't change what had already happened. I was sitting in the living room, enjoying the silence that was no longer oppressive. She was mine. My walls no longer heard lies. My house was no longer an arena for betrayal. It was a place where I could breathe. Suddenly, the phone rang. "Hey, Emma, you're not going to believe this," Lisa's voice came on the line, and I heard the familiar excitement in it that she had whenever she managed to get the latest gossip. I chuckled. "Come on, surprise me. Alex and his lover are holed up in a tiny apartment. They say they quarrel every day. They're shouting so loudly that the neighbors are already thinking about a collective complaint." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. Well, I can't say that I'm surprised. "You're reaping what you sowed, right?" Lisa chuckled. "How are you? Are you holding up?" I know it wasn't easy. I took a cup of tea, let its warmth spread through my body, penetrate into the very corners of my soul, where there were still fragments of the past. "It's been a journey, Lisa," I said honestly. "But I'm moving forward. I feel a little lighter every day. I feel like I'm getting my life back. You're the strongest woman I know, Emma. And hey, if you need anything, I'm always there, okay?" Her words were like a balm, washing away the remnants of pain. "Thanks. I really appreciate it." Our conversation moved smoothly to lighter topics, a rare but welcome relief after so many months of stress and struggle. When I hung up, there was silence in the room, but now it no longer scared me. It was my space, my refuge. I looked around and saw a house that no longer reminded me of the past, but told me about the future. I picked up the camera and felt its pleasant weight in my hands, as if an old friend had returned to me after a long absence. I took a few pictures, soft light, my son's toys, a reflection of a new stage of life. Every click of the shutter was a statement. The past does not define me, I determine my own future. Later, while putting my son to bed, I gently stroked his hair, watching his tiny hand squeeze my finger, and whispered a promise to him, a promise of happiness, love, and a life free from lies and betrayal. Outside, the stars twinkled, scattering across the sky, as if opening an endless canvas of possibilities in front of us. Alex and his lover were just a closed chapter. A lesson I've learned. And what really mattered was just beginning. And it was perfect.